Hi there, welcome to the Research Like a Pro question and answer series. This is Nicole Dyer, and today's video is about creating style guides for genealogical research reports. And this is an excerpt from our recent September Research Like a Pro office hours session. And every month we have a tip that goes along with the theme of the course for that month. So we were talking about research reports, and I shared some ideas for using a style guide to help you make decisions about how you will present various sources and source citations to be consistent across the entire report, and other style guide options such as when to italicize, capitalize, all the things that you need to decide for consistency throughout your report. So I hope you enjoy this video.
All right, for our tip of the month, we're talking about style guides for research reports. And this is a topic that we've been thinking about in our research company in the last couple of months, and just working on consistency and consistency across our brand and our company as far as the client reports that we put out, and then internal consistency within the report itself. And that's probably the most important part. So when we are making these formal research reports, it's good to have things within the report be consistent, and that increases the credibility and professional look of the report and also makes it easier for the reader. It demonstrates professional attention to detail, and it makes your work easier to follow. Like I said, easier for the reader. And it also helps you as you're writing and eliminates some of the decision making, the guesswork that we have when we're trying to remember what we're going to do. So it can help us during that writing process to know exactly what to do in all of our decisions. So once you make a decision, record it in your style guide, and then you won't have to make um, time over and over to decide how you want to present numbers, abbreviations, citations for certain record types, shortened citations, and all of those things. So, to make a style guide, we need to think about the things that we want to keep consistent and then kind of keep track of those in a document. And this consistency really helps the readers focus on your research findings rather than being distracted by all those formatting variations that can creep in. And it really helps it to be professional. So, creating your own style guide is the solution where you keep track of those decisions and you can put in there whatever decisions you've come to. It doesn't need to be a comprehensive style guide about everything. For me, when I made a style guide for my portfolio, I was writing the kinship determination project, which is 3 generations of proving family relationships. And there were certain things that I always just remembered that I wanted to do that I didn't need to keep track of. But some things I would do one way in the first generation and then forget. And then by the third generation, I was doing it another way. So I had to start keeping track of those. So here are some ideas for things you might want to put into a style guide. Citation consistency. So for various record types, I had a lot of death certificates in mind, so I had to keep track of how I was going to cite those. And then how to do the short form. You want your short form citations to be consistent throughout. So I didn't shorten anything until the very end, and then I decided how I was going to do it for all the record types that I had. The main ones that I shortened were like censuses and articles online, you know, any kind of manuscript, that kind of thing. And so then I decided how to do it, kept track of my style guide, and then I went and shortened everything all at once. So it was easy to remember because I just did that at once. Capitalization, any rules for proper nouns that you're going to choose, spelling of names, how to handle repeated names in the same paragraph, how you're going to handle including maiden names, whether those are in parentheses or not, or only using their maiden names and not their married names, whether to include the county or not. So there's all kinds of considerations for that. So here's an example of Tucson, Pima, Arizona, where you don't put the word county here. Maybe you don't want to even include the county here. You just put Tucson, Arizona, or maybe you would abbreviate county to BCO and that kind of thing. And then abbreviations. Will you abbreviate anything in the text? What about in the citations? Will you abbreviate the months in citations or just spell everything all the way out every time? And then for your headings, how will you set up the heading hierarchy? Heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, and what will the formatting be like for all of those? So the style guide that I used for my kinship determination project was just a pretty basic, simple document for the things that I was trying to remember that I couldn't always remember across different things. Some things I could remember just fine, so it's not comprehensive. So I decided not to abbreviate the months at all. Access dates, I decided that I would put them all in because I had created citations in my research log with all the access dates, but I decided that I would remove them if space was an issue. But for now, use full months and don't abbreviate. So for access dates, I would put 9 September 2025. And then later I did have a space issue. So at the last minute or the last hour, actually, I was deleting all of the access dates out of my whole kinship determination project because it had to be under 63 pages to fit with all my other work samples for the first part of my portfolio submission. So that was a challenge, but at least I knew what to do while I was working. So I didn't have to keep thinking about the access dates and whether or not to include them. I just followed my rule. And then when it was time to remove them all, it wasn't very hard. Then age. So spell out ages under 100. So I would write 70 instead of put the numerals 70. And Chicago Manual of Style says to spell out numbers under 100. So that was part of my decision-making process, was looking in the Chicago Manual of Style for that. And then use numerals for measurements in years. And I decided I would use numerals for money and years for dates and years and dates and spell out ages. So I wanted to use numerals for some things. It didn't really make sense to me to spell out the year, obviously, or measurements. And also money, I wanted to use numerals for money. And I had a lot of tax records in my KDP talking about money. And so didn't really make sense to me to spell that out like I would spell out the age of 70. So I put this into my style guide and then I was consistent with it. And then another example, images online. In my citations, I decided I didn't want to use that phrase. I decided to simply use the word image instead of image online, just for conciseness. And I just felt like it was obvious that it was online with the URL here. And then I had a certain way I would cite images that were on FamilySearch, but that were locked. And that was that I would include the IGN or image group number. But when the images were not locked, which was most of the time, I didn't worry about including the IGN number because I just included the full URL. But then here, because I didn't have that full URL, I put the catalog URL to that item in the catalog. And then, you have to go to the FamilySearch centers to view the actual images in that item. And then I just put the image group number for an extra help with finding that image group, because within this item, there are multiple image group numbers, and they kind of correspond to what used to be microfilm numbers. So I included that. And then further down in my style guide, I decided how I would use the repository names. I didn't want to repeat the word Oklahoma multiple times in all of the deeds and tax records I got from that courthouse. So I just put Love County Clerk's Office, Marietta, without Oklahoma, just knowing that I already had the word Oklahoma in there, didn't need to repeat it. And then for newspapers, I had to make some decisions about whether or not to include column numbers in the citation, and including the state names for newspapers that only mention the city. So I would put the state name in square brackets after the city. Some examples of this will put the city and state after the whole name of the newspaper. Some will use parentheses. So this is the stylistic choice that I made. And then use the word image. So image, and then credit the image provider and the full URL. So then the newspapers.com was the image provider and the full URL to the clipping of the article that I made. And then short form citations. Here's how I decided to do that. Shorten citations after the first use by deleting the repository and publication info after the semicolon. And then to shorten find a grave citations, it was a little trickier. And I had a lot of these. So I had to make sure to keep the info about whether or not there was a headstone image. So find a grave, this memorial member, this person, and then the fact that there's a gravestone photo by blah, blah, blah. And then I decided not to put contributor numbers when I do short form find a grave citations. So that's how I ended up doing my style guide. It wasn't very long, but it was very helpful. And whenever I had a question about how to do things, I would make a decision and put it here. All right, are there any questions or comments about creating a style guide?
Yes, we do have a question. How does the IGN in a citation help someone know that the source is locked?
I don't think it necessarily helps them know that it's locked. I'm just trying to give them as much detailed information as I can to how to get to the image. So going back to this, in my regular citation, they can click this URL and it goes right to the exact image. But in this URL, there's no way to give them a URL to a locked image. So I have to give them the URL to the catalog item. And then within the catalog item, there's sometimes like 5, 10, 15 different image groups. And so I'm just giving them which image group had the image of this deeds, volume B2, page 698.99.
Would you also put the image number in that citation?
I could have if I would have kept track of that, but I didn't. So when I went to the
Uh,
Family History Center and I went through all those locked images, all I did was keep track of the deed volume and page number. So
right.
that would have been a good idea.
Well, chalk it up to experience the next time. That's tricky when you can't just look at it from home to fix that up because I go back and look
Right.
at my
Yeah.
my things all the time to work on the citations.